everyone around me looked like me, they acted like me, they thought like me, and they talked like me. In fact, I can't remember a single time that I heard someone speak in a different language when I was a child. And even the accents were only from television. And so I built stories in my mind about the accents. If you had a British accent, you must be the hero of the story, because the hero of the story always had a British accent. And if you had a Russian accent, villain of the story, because the villain always had a Russian accent. And if you spoke with a French accent, then you must be romantic, because everyone with a French accent was romantic. And when I saw a map of the world, I didn't think about the countries, I thought about stereotypes. And so when I would see Brazil, I could only think about soccer. And when I thought about Australia, I could only think about a kangaroo. And when I thought about Africa, which to me was one big country and not more than 50 countries like it actually is, when I saw Africa, I would think of poverty, because that was the only picture that I ever saw of Africa when I was a child. And I only saw those pictures on television. And so when I saw China, I only thought of pandas. And we would go out into our backyard and we would dig holes, because someone had told us that if you dig a hole far enough, you could make it and you could see the pandas. You could make it all the way to China. But even as a child, I understood that that was a big and impossible dream, that it was too far away and I could never make it all the way to China. But in 2004, my big impossible dream came true. And for the first time, I made it to mainland China. And on the same trip, another big dream came true, because for the first time, I became a father. We adopted our daughter from the Gansu province in Lanzhou. And 2 years later, our family packed everything up and we moved here to China to live. And in 2009, we adopted our son from the United States. So just so you understand, we lived in the United States and we adopted our daughter from China. And then we moved to China and we adopted our son from the United States. And any father will tell you that it's difficult to be a father. But to be an international father adds layers of complexity. It makes it even more difficult. There are lots of terms for children like mine who are growing up outside of their parents' culture. But I think the most common and the simplest is this term: third culture kid. This is how it works. My children are U.S. citizens. They have U.S. passports. They speak fluent U.S. English. However, my daughter has spent 74% of her life here in China, and my son 78%. And so even though they look and act and think like the people from that country, they'll never be completely connected to that culture like a typical American child would be. However, even though they're living in this culture, they speak my language. And because I am raising them, they think like me. So they'll never be as connected to this culture as a typical Chinese child. And so researchers and experts figured out many, many years ago that that children like this identify most commonly with a third culture. And it's not just a combination of this culture and that culture. Instead, it's a set of characteristics that all of these children, or many of them at least, hold in common. And there are millions of these children around the world. And so my children are not alone. One of the most common experiences that we have with my daughter is we'll just be walking along the street in China, or we'll be getting on a bus and someone will come up to her and they'll look at her and then they'll look at us. And they're confused. So they look at her and they assume that she speaks perfect Chinese. And then they look at us and they assume that we speak no Chinese. And both of those are false. However, of course, they talk to her first and they say, "Who's your mother? Who's your father?" And even from the time she was a little girl, she would roll her eyes and she would look at us and she would point and say, "They are my mother and they are my father." And then the people will say, that's impossible. Your hair is so black. You look like a Chinese girl. Aren't you a Chinese girl? Well, how is a young Chinese girl supposed to answer that question? If she says, no, I'm actually an American, which is true, they'll say, that's impossible. Your hair is so black. But if she says, I am a Chinese girl, they'll say, then how can these be your parents? It's impossible. See, as an international father, or as a father, I know how to answer these questions in my home country. I know how to have conversations about family and parenthood and adoption. But as an international father, there's something going on inside of me with two different sets of responsibilities. First, my responsibility is to keep her safe. I want her to feel safe. I want her to be safe both physically and emotionally. And so I don't want her to be threatened by a question that she can't answer. But at the same time, it's my responsibility to teach her about respect. And I don't want her to learn to be rude from me. And so I want her to learn to respect people. And I want her to learn to respect culture. But at the same time, my wife and I want to be the voice that gets to determine and gets to teach her about what words mean and what concepts mean. Concepts like family and mother and father and adoption. And at the same time, I want her to be connected to the country that she was born in. I want her to love the country that she is being raised in. And so these two sets of responsibilities go back and forth, and it's more complex. As a father, as a monocultural father, I only have to navigate one culture. But as an international father, I have to navigate your culture as well. And then there is my son. My son also creates confusion and brings many questions. I remember one time when he was about 9 months old, a man came up to me and he said, "Is this your son?" And I said, "Yes, this is my son." And he said, "That's impossible. He's so black." And I said, "Yes, well, he is adopted." And he said, "He's what?" I said, "He is adopted." And he said, "He's what?" And I said, "He is adopted, like from an orphanage, even though he has never been in an orphanage." And the man said, "Oh, you have such good hearts. Where is he from? India?" And I said, No. He is from America." And he said, "That's impossible. He's too black." And I said, "Well, his biological father was black. His biological mother," and he said, "Oh, she was American." And I said, No. They are both American. But his biological father has black skin. And his biological mother, and he said, "Oh, she is American." And I said, No. Finally, I said, "He is like Obama." And the man said, "Oh, he's so smart." And another time, one of our good friends walked up to us and she spoke to him in the wintertime. And in the wintertime, his skin gets much lighter. And she said, "Oh, your skin is so much whiter now." And then she said, "It is much better." And see, when I hear something like that, inside of me, something happens. Because where I come from, we have a long and very difficult history of treating people poorly simply because of the color of their skin. If they came from an African heritage like my son, or from Central or South America, or from Asia, or from many of the indigenous people of the world, my country has treated them poorly, has treated them as less than human, simply because of that difference. And so when I hear words like, "He is too black," or "He is much better now," something happens inside of me and I get angry. I want to cover his ears and I want to fight, because I don't want him to think for a minute that he is less of a person simply because he is a different color. And I want him to be proud of the color of his skin. And I get very, very upset. And then I pause, because I realize that this man is simply asking questions because he's curious. And this woman is actually trying to give him a compliment. And the insults that I hear are not coming from them or from their culture. They're coming from me. and they're coming from mine. And see, being an international father is challenging because I not only have to navigate the difficulties of your culture, but I have to wrestle and I have to fight with the worst parts of my own. If you live in Qingdao, you know that in June we had a very big meeting. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or as we call it, the SCO, invited, along with President Xi, the leaders of more than half of the world's population to meet right here. And it was incredible. We got new buildings. We got new streets. And they gave us lights like nothing I have ever seen before. They invited the great director of the Beijing 2008 Olympics opening ceremony, Mr. Zhang Yimou, to come and prepare for the opening ceremony of this meeting as well. And he invited dozens of Chinese performers for this big and grand performance, and just a few foreigners. There were 4 foreign children who were chosen to represent different regions of the world. And my son's skin was just perfect to represent South America. He has never been to South America. But as an actor, he took on the job, he took on the role, and they practiced for weeks. And finally, they got to run across the stage as millions of people watched on television and as the leaders of billions of people sat just meters away. It was incredible. And after it was all over, he was talking to my wife, and he said, "Mom, before this meeting, I had 3 heroes. You and Dad and God. But now I have 4. Me, because I was in the SCO. It gives me great pride to watch as my children overcome the stereotypes that my culture has put on them and your culture has put on them. I am filled with joy as I watch them move past the difficulties of growing up as a foreigner. And I absolutely love it when they identify and embrace their own identities. Whether that identity is a little girl or a young woman, a little boy or a young man, a United States citizen or a resident of China, a third culture kid or an international student, a South American or a hero. I am an international father, and I can't imagine anything better than that. My kids are growing up as foreigners right here in a place that we consider to be a foreign country. The people around them are different. They think different, they act different, they speak different, but they are meeting people and they are making friends from all over the world. We are traveling to places, and they are experiencing foods from all over the world. And when my children look at a map of the world, they don't think in stereotypes like I did. They think in people, real people, friends and playmates who have names and faces and families. And they still play games, but they don't need to dig a hole to go and dream about the faraway places like I did, because there is no place on this earth that will ever be too far away for them. 1 was my number. There was one country, one culture, one language, one way of thinking. And I am thankful for my upbringing. I'm thankful for the values that were put into me by my monocultural parents, but it is a mistake. It is a mistake to think that raising a child beyond the borders of their passport is somehow less, that it is less stable, that it is less solid, and certainly that it is less good. My children will never be as connected to the number 1 as I was. Not one country, not one culture, not one language, and certainly not one way of thinking, but they are being raised in a rapidly changing world. And that world is more ready for than ever, and they are more in need than ever for minds that think and for hearts that feel multicultural. They, like you, have been given the opportunity to look beyond a single story. See, when I was a child, China was just a big, impossible dream to me. And now, I call it home. To be clear, it's not the same as my other home. It will never replace my other home, and I will always love my other home. But living here has given me the opportunity to understand that not only is it okay, but it is good to love more than one place, and you can love them differently. Many of you have been given the same opportunity that they have been given, and I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you that even if you never leave this country, that you will build relationships, and especially if you do leave this country, that you will build relationships that challenge you, and build relationships that think about the world from a different perspective, and have experiences that challenge you to look at your own culture through different eyes. And if it is your big, impossible dream to dig a hole and to see the faraway places, then my hope for you is that your dream, like mine did, will come true. Thank you.